So Joe Rogan is pushing back. He said, back off of me. He's pushing back against claims that he, quote unquote, screwed over Kamala Harris. This, of course, is related to her potential appearance on his podcast during this past, her 2024 presidential campaign. Full disclosure, I'm not like a Joe Rogan fan. I think a lot of the people he brings on are really dumb and potentially even dangerous. And I think he has a responsibility with his platform to curate a little, be a little more judicious in deciding who to bring on your show. But all that being said, I think the situation here, I think he's in the right. Spoiler alert. But let me kind of walk you through. So, of course, Joe Rogan has his show, The Joe Rogan Experience. It was a podcast started by him in 2009. Before that, he was, had a very interesting, diverse career. He was a stand-up comedian. He was a UFC commentator. He was the host of Fear Factor. And this podcast ended up becoming wildly successful. And I believe it's like the most popular podcast in the world. And one of the very first videos I did on this channel was Spotify renewing their multi-million-dollar, like we're talking, 9-figure deal with Rogan to have his show exclusively hosted on Spotify, right? And again, like I mentioned before, he brings on all different kinds of guests. And sometimes he gets in trouble, rightfully so, for bringing on people that spread misinformation, particularly about vaccines. That was really, that really came to a head during COVID. Bringing on, he'll bring on like a really respected, I'm making this up, but like an epidemiologist. And then like the next episode will be some kind of, I'm sorry, this is, if you're looking for balanced news, then you've come to the wrong place. This is an opinion show. Sometimes we'll bring on like these crackpots talking about supplements and stuff as if that's like a substitute for, very well documented and studied and tested vaccine, right? So, he's a firebrand, if you will, for better or for worse. So there was this big push to try to get Kamala Harris on the show ahead of the election. And this would have been really important, right? Because it would have given her the opportunity to connect to a demographic that up to that point had eluded her, particularly undecided white men. Now you can make arguments of, should she go after, is it right to have to cater to undecided white men, this, that, the other thing. That's a really interesting and valid point to raise, and you could discuss that. But what is not debatable is that she needed that demographic, right? That very much would have, even if it's not about specifically translating to as a one-to-one, like, oh, this listener is going to now vote for me. Rather, it's going to make you seem cool, right? If you go on Rogan, like, I think there's this concern because of, like, the misinformation part of Rogan and him kind of leaning, a little more right. Like, he doesn't really fit neatly on the political spectrum, right? Because I would say he's like a socially liberal libertarian, right? Who has a lot of vaccine skepticism. So, famously, Bernie Sanders went on his show in 2020, which a lot of people were like, oh, you don't do that, because the Democratic establishment's like, what? We would never go on such an uncouth program, right? And then Joe Rogan ended up endorsing him during the primary, right? And what Bernie kind of represented was, again, speaking to, economic populist concerns that transcended the simple binary of current American politics. So not only would Kamala have reached this demographic, but it also would have given her a little more street cred because she went to the lion's den, right? A big complaint people had with Kamala Harris was that she was way too measured, way too careful. So going on Rogan's show would have shown that she had balls, right? I know that's a really gendered way of putting it, but that's how Rogan would have put it, right? Of course, this never ended up happening. She never went on the show. Her opponent, Donald Trump, did a 3-hour episode, and famously, of course, he went on to then win the election. So the claims that Rogan is pushing back on are coming from a book published by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes titled Fight, inside the wildest battle for the White House, end quote. And I'm always suspicious of books like this. Like, this is very recent history. So, like, how good could this book be if you churned it out in just like a couple of months, right? But it's focusing on detailing the chaotic 2024 election. And a particular section of the book, makes the suggestion that the reason why Kamala didn't go on the show is that Rogan's team made it difficult for her to appear on the show, and not meeting them in the middle. Rogan completely refutes this implication, saying, quote, "They said a bunch of things that weren't true." They being, I think, like the authors of this book. "They supposedly talked to like 150 different people about her, but they didn't talk to us, which is kind of crazy. Like, they didn't even ask," end quote. And again, his argument is that the Harris campaign, it was very difficult to get them to commit. Saying, quote, "Trump was really easy to book, like super easy. We offered one day, he said yes, and that was it. There was no, what are we going to talk about? How long is it going to be? Is this going to be edited? There was nothing," end quote. So, kind of referencing the fact that, Kamala's team and her, probably coming from her, wanted to have a lot more control over the nature of the interview, which, love it or hate it, is not what the Joe Rogan experience is about. The experience of the Joe Rogan experience are these long-form, very loose, casual conversations that can be really illuminated, right? He talks about that the campaign asked him to come to Washington to do a 45-minute interview with her. By contrast, his episodes are typically, 1, 2, with Trump, 3 hours. And it's recorded at his studio in Austin, Texas. So it seems like she only really wanted to do it if it was completely frictionless for her, which, again, this is just like maybe a psychology thing, but I feel like people will do that where they'll say something or they'll set terms for something that are not going to be met, and they set those terms because they know they won't be met, and really they just don't want to do the thing at all, right? So if you say to someone like, "Oh, I would only sell this for $1 million," like, they're usually saying that because they know the person's not going to pay $1 million. It's because they don't really want to sell in the first place, right? So it seems like she either was completely just, I only want to do this if I don't have to put any effort in, or she just didn't really want to do it at all. That remains to be seen, but in any case, she was not really willing to kind of enter into what the Joe Rogan experience is about. And he also argues against these claims, saying that some of them are just straight up lies, saying, quote, "They never agreed to do the show. None of that's true. They never agreed. They also said that they sent someone down here to the studio to do a walkthrough of the set. That's not true. The Trump administration did," end quote. And a lot of people claimed that, Rogan made it difficult for the Harris campaign because he was biased against her, and really was for Trump. Now, to be fair, Rogan did go on to endorse Trump, though I've, on this show, called Rogan out on that because previously he had said Trump, I'm paraphrasing, but had said Trump was a threat to democracy and all this stuff, right? So, that's a hard square to circle, but, he makes it clear that he wanted to interview both of them, right? And he said, quote, "I wanted to release both of the interviews on the same day. This was my goal," end quote. He really understood he had a platform, and he wanted to give both candidates the chance to use that platform. But it seemed like the Harris campaign kind of wanted to set the rules in a way that would compromise what makes the platform special or powerful. So overall, this is just a colossal error in judgment on Kamala Harris's part, right? Again, she was acting like she was going to be doing Rogan a favor by getting to interview her. No. She needed it more than Rogan needed it. Rogan did not need to interview her. She needed it. And this just reflects a larger issue with her campaign, right? So instead of doing that, she was catering to, classic neoliberal priorities and even trying to get some Republicans who had defected, who are anti-Trump, to try to vote for her. She failed to appeal to the economic populist concerns that both sides of the political spectrum are concerned with. She failed to really appeal to or acknowledge the same concerns that propelled Trump to the White House, not just once now, but twice. So it's an obvious blunder. And Rogan's argument here is that the reason why they're trying to put out these lies, according to him, is to try to shift the blame. Because of how dumb this was. This was dumb even then. Even before she had lost, everyone went, that is so stupid that she's not going to be on Rogan. That she really, I don't know why that's going on, but she really screwed herself over. And she screwed herself over, right? And Rogan even says, quote, someone's trying to preserve their job. Maybe someone's trying to say, hey, it wasn't my fault, they became difficult. No, we didn't become difficult. End quote. Basically saying, like, look, someone's probably trying to just argue, like, well, it's not our fault we didn't go on, so I should still have this high consulting, freelance gig, and make millions of dollars. And campaigns have basically just become like money laundering schemes, essentially. So all of this to say, if nothing else, it just reinforces how important podcasts are becoming, right, as a media outlet. Of course, they've always been popular. I mean, I've been listening to podcasts on and off, but I've been listening to podcasts since I was like in middle school, like, in the late 2000s, early 2010s, right? But they've really been blowing up in no small part because of Rogan, right? Because of his show becoming so popular, first on YouTube, then on Spotify. And it really does offer a salve for a media environment dominated by cable news, right? This is a lot more intimate. It's more conversational. And the reason why it's able to be those things is because there's really little to no time constraints. The way, as opposed to how television is very rigid with time slots and ad breaks, and podcasts really don't have to abide by that. And listeners develop way more personal parasocial relationships with someone like Joe Rogan than they would with Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity or any of these other, commentators, right? Maybe sports radio, right? That's kind of like the predecessor to podcasting, I feel, in a lot of ways. But this is just like a whole other animal. So a lot of people have said that this was the election of podcasting. So, I think it's only going to become even more and more important. Wow, what an interesting story. I'm sure you have some thoughts about the topic, so comment below, let me know what you think. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really, really helps people find the channel and makes me feel all warm inside. Until next time, I'm Peter Mancuso. Peace out.